The Iraqi police who came to us were overwhelmingly recruits, illiterate, unclothed, and frankly, ignorant fundamentally of any Western idea of life or living and how to form a working police organization. We thought in our eminent wisdom that we could create a curriculum that talked about things like search and seizure and constitutional protections and personal liberties and freedoms. None of that resonates in Iraq. Trust me. And so this program we built not only didn't reach its intended target, it wasn't understood by anybody. And in the meantime, Iraqi recruits were being routinely targeted and killed. So we had to revamp our training and essentially make it into a program that gave them life and survival skills. Survival skills, I think you understand. When I talk about life skills, just to make the point about how fundamental the baseline was in training the Iraqi police, we had to construct, and beware, this is one of the first graphic things that I'll share with you. We had to construct a lesson block that taught them how to use toilet paper rather than rocks for a bowel movement. Now, I don't know any American police academy that has that in its core curriculum. So it's just an extraordinarily different experience. At the same time, as we tried to impart to them survival skills to stay alive long enough to survive and become institutionalized, we were wary of the fact that if we weren't careful, we would recreate a second paramilitary force just like the one Saddam had, and it would make no difference whether we had been there or not. Next, please. Iraq, as a matter of backdrop, is a dilapidated country that enjoyed some economic success as a secular nation in the 1960s, but has been in a steady state of decline since then. Sewage ran freely in the streets. Children walked freely in that free-running sewage. Sunni and Shiites were segregated from one another and acted out violently against one another, a very dangerous setting. You never knew where the threat was going to come from. All you knew was that the risk was high. And I share this with you that 96 hours after I got in country, one of our convoys was attacked in a traffic circle 4 blocks from our headquarters, and I watched in dismay as this convoy limped into our compound, one vehicle pushing another. 4 casualties, 4 of my men, would turn out to be my men, toppled out, grievously wounded, literally blood up to our elbows. It's 95 degrees, flies in the air, just a picture of Dante's Inferno. And that was my introduction to the country and the level of risk with which we had to contend. Next, please. Next. Children are everywhere in Iraq. The problem is we could never know whether they extended a genuine hand of friendship and interest to us or whether they were a ploy to get our attention, to divert our attention, or to lead us into an ambush. And probably the most poignant experience I remember with a child was on a patrol through Sadr City, if you can imagine this. And from an alleyway from our left, this is in daytime, comes racing out an 8-year-old child, just like one of our children or grandchildren would run around at play. But this child had a full-sized, hand-carved wooden replica of an AK-47 that he came out and confronted our convoy with and went through the play acting of attacking us. 2 consequences of that. One, we almost killed an 8-year-old child. And secondly, if that doesn't set you back on your heels about what's happening in this country and what we have an obligation either to do or not to do because of it happening. So the children were this enormous challenge. They seemed to be vibrant and resilient, but you simply didn't know if they were only children or were they something else. Next, please. Next. Saddam lived prosperously there. This is his water palaces, constructed his own lake system, stocked it with his own fish, and created poverty, abject poverty, through the rest of the country. And there was this extraordinary imbalance of riches, which made things much more difficult. Next, please. My first encounter with the legacy of Saddam Hussein was in his death chamber, which is what you see here. This is a double gallows. It is reputed that he killed 30,000 of his opposition here, hanging 2 of them at a time, 24 hours a day. We have no way to verify those numbers, but it is a sobering and sombering experience to walk where certainly tens of thousands of people died at his hand. Next. And when you go into the cells immediately adjacent to the death gallows, you see the writings on the wall of those men who were preparing to die and the last things they had to say. Next, please. The training of the Iraqi police went on over a long period of time. It was extremely difficult. We worked originally through interpreters, so even when we devised a 320-hour program, which seems relatively ambitious, particularly for the Middle East, it really was only 160 hours because everything had to be translated. That has all evolved, and it is better now than it was before. But anybody who mistakenly believes that we have the capacity to create an Iraqi security force that is on par with a first-level Western nation is mistaken. We had to learn to settle for something different, something less than what we thought was appropriate. As we tried to vet recruits to come to us, we said, well, let's run them through the databases just like we do in the United States. Well, there's a fundamental problem with that. There weren't any databases. And so to whom did we turn? We had to go to the tribal leaders throughout the provinces of Iraq where the greatest power rests at the provincial level and ask the tribal leaders, thumbs up or thumbs down on this guy. And that's how we vetted people. And it worked a hell of a lot better than us trying to find non-existent databases to check people's names. Next. This is the Iraqi security force as they exist today. The exceptional thing about this photograph is that these young men allowed their pictures to be taken because early on in the war, what you saw, if you saw the Iraqi security forces anywhere deployed in Baghdad, and let me tell you, they were reluctant to be deployed. They wore balaclavas, masks that concealed their identities for fear that retribution would be wreaked against their families if their identities were revealed. It's not a particularly comforting notion to run around a country looking for its law enforcement authorities and the few that you see all wear ski masks to conceal their identity. So we worked hard to kind of overcome that. Next, please. They were trained in basic marksmanship with basic fighting skills. They created some commando units, which frankly were nothing more than probably thugs in larger uniforms. We had to go through several evolutions of training to get to the right people and impart to them the right skills. Next, please. Next. Next. Today, if you go back, you find some modern facilities beginning to emerge from the dust and the shadows. And the Iraqi security forces are, I would say, somewhere on a continuum of 1 to 100%, probably about at the 50 to 70% mark, which is significant progress, frankly. Next, please. Next. This was an interesting place. This was their MOUT training, military operations in urban terrain. Saddam had built this facility, ironically, for his command staff to be trained in, but he was deposed before he got a chance to use it. So, as an alternative, we took it and turned it into a training facility. Next, please. Weapons were a huge issue in Iraq. Everybody in Iraq has an AK-47. By law, and this is canonized in Iraqi law, every family owns an AK-47, which is a bit problematic. It's even worse than Arizona. And it's particularly problematic because of when they choose to use AK-47s. For instance, the Iraqi police, when they're directing traffic, resort immediately from hand signals to the discharge of AK-47s. When there are queues at gas stations, and by the way, gas is only sold on Thursdays in Iraq. It's only sold for 12 hours. It costs a nickel a gallon. It's a good price, but the queues can sometimes be 2 to 3 miles. People are not particularly happy to stand in a queue that long in their car, and they run out of gas while they're waiting to get gas. Something wrong with that picture, but that's a whole other story. And so sometimes wise drivers go around those who are stalled or stopped, which doesn't particularly make the people behind them happy. And they get into confrontations. And the Iraqi police control that kind of confrontation by ripping off hundreds of rounds out of an AK-47. It's a little unnerving, to say the least, when you pass a gas station.